Hello, welcome to Blacktop Files. Tonight we bring you a set of cases from drivers who learned that the emptiest roads can carry the heaviest cargo. Blacktop Files delivers long-form horror stories that feel like true accounts from across the United States. Tonight we're focusing on something particular to the mountains: taxi drivers working the hollers and backroads of Appalachia. These aren't the city cabs you wave down on a corner. These are men who take calls at 2 a.m. to drive 40 minutes up a gravel road, who know every hairpin turn and washed-out bridge, who've learned to read weather and distance and the look on a passenger's face when something isn't right. What makes these accounts especially disturbing is the pattern. Different drivers, different counties, sometimes years apart, but the same kinds of things keep surfacing. Fares that shouldn't exist, destinations that aren't on any map, passengers who know too much or say too little, and roads that seem to change when you're not looking. The drivers who sent us these files all share one thing: they still work the mountains, but there are certain routes they won't take anymore, certain times they won't answer the phone, and certain questions they've learned not to ask. If you want more horror that feels uncomfortably real, make sure to subscribe to Blacktop Files. Turn on notifications so you never miss a file. And tell us in the comments where you're listening from tonight. Whether that's a city, a small town, or somewhere off the grid. Let's start with a night that taught one driver the difference between being lost and being taken somewhere. I've been driving taxi in these mountains for 11 years. I work out of a town in eastern Kentucky that you've probably never heard of, and that's fine. Most of my fares are locals who need a ride to the grocery store or the clinic. Sometimes someone whose car broke down and needs to get home before dark. The money isn't great, but I know the roads better than anyone, and that counts for something when half the haulers don't have street signs and your GPS just spins in circles. This was 3 winters ago, middle of January. I was working nights because the day driver had thrown his back out, and the company needed someone to cover the late shift until he healed up. I didn't mind. Night driving in the mountains is different, quieter, and you get used to the dark pretty quick. Most of the calls are from the bar on Route 15 or the truck stop near the county line. Predictable stuff. The call came in around 1 a.m. Dispatch gave me an address I didn't recognize, which wasn't unusual. People move into these mountains all the time, rent a cabin for a season, then leave. The address was up past Stillwell, which is barely a town, just a post office and a church, and maybe 30 houses scattered along the ridge. Dispatch said the fare was a man who needed a ride to the bus station in Hazard. That was a 40-minute drive. One way, but the fare was paying double for the distance, so I took it. I headed up Route 15 and turned onto the access road that winds up towards Stillwell. The road is narrow, 2 lanes that turn into 1.5 once you get past the church. The trees press in close on both sides, and in winter they're just black shapes against a blacker sky. I had my high beams on, but they only reach so far. The road climbed steadily, and I passed a couple of driveways marked with reflectors, but no lights in any of the windows. People up here go to bed early. I found the address about 10 minutes past the church. It was a gravel driveway that forked off to the left, marked with a wooden post that had the number painted on it in white. I turned in and followed the driveway up through the trees. It curved twice, climbed a short hill, and then opened into a clearing with a small cabin set back against the ridge. There was a single light on above the front door, and I could see a figure standing on the porch. I pulled up close to the porch and left the engine running. The figure stepped down into the light, and I got a better look at him. He was an older man, maybe 60, maybe older. He was wearing a heavy coat and a knit cap, and he was carrying a duffel bag. He opened the back door and got in without saying anything, just set the bag on the seat beside him and pulled the door shut. I turned around in my seat. "Hazard bus station?" He nodded. His face was lean and weathered, the kind of face you see a lot up here. He didn't smile, didn't make eye contact, just nodded once and looked out the window. I put the car in reverse and backed down the driveway. The whole time I could feel him watching the trees, like he was looking for something. I didn't ask. People up here don't always want to talk, and I've learned not to push it. I got back onto the access road and started the drive toward Hazard. For the first 10 minutes, everything was normal. The road descended back toward Route 15, winding through the same stretch of forest I'd just driven through. The man in the back seat didn't say a word, just kept looking out the window. I turned on the radio to fill the silence, found a station playing old country, and kept my eyes on the road. Then I noticed the road didn't look right. I should have been coming up on the church by then, the one with the white steeple that you can see from a quarter-mile away, but I wasn't seeing it. I was still in the trees, still winding downhill, and the road felt longer than it should have. I checked the odometer. I'd gone almost 15 minutes from the cabin, which should have put me well past Stillwell and onto Route 15. But I was still on the access road, still in the forest, and nothing looked familiar. I slowed down and checked the mirror. The man in the back seat was still watching the trees. His expression hadn't changed. "This road feel longer to you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. He didn't answer right. Away. Then, without looking at me, he said, "Just keep driving." I didn't like the way he said it. Not threatening, but flat. Like he knew something I didn't. I kept driving. The road kept winding, kept descending, and I kept waiting to see something I recognized. A driveway, a mailbox, the church, anything. But there was nothing. Just trees and darkness, and the narrow strip of road, caught in my headlights. I checked my phone. No signal, which wasn't surprising this far up, but it still made my chest tighten. Then I saw the sign. It was on the right side of the road, a wooden post with a hand-painted sign nailed to it. The sign said, "Stillwell," and there was an arrow pointing back the way I'd come. I hit the brakes. The car skidded a little on the gravel, and I pulled over onto the shoulder. I stared at the sign. I had just come from Stillwell. I had picked the man up past Stillwell. The sign should have been behind me, not in front of me. I turned around in my seat and looked at this man. He was still staring out the window, his hands folded in his lap. His face was calm, almost blank. "What's going on?" I asked. He finally looked at me. His eyes were dark, hard to read in the dim light from the dashboard. "You need to keep driving," he said. "Don't stop until I tell you. I just passed a sign that says Stillwell is behind us. That doesn't make sense." "It doesn't have to make sense," he said. "Just drive." I didn't move. My hands were tight on the wheel, and I could feel my pulse in my throat. "Where are we going?" "Hazard," he said. "Like I told you. This isn't the right road." "It's the only road," he said. I stared at him for a long moment, trying to decide what to do. He didn't look dangerous, but he didn't look normal either. There was something in his voice, something that made me think he knew exactly what was happening and wasn't going to explain it. I put the car back in drive and started moving again. I didn't know what else to do. I thought about turning around, heading back toward the cabin, but the idea of going back up that road made my stomach twist. So I kept going forward, kept watching the trees, kept waiting for something to change. The road started to climb again. That didn't make sense either. It should have been descending all the way to Route 15, but instead it was rising, curving back up into the ridge. I passed another sign, this one older and more faded, and it said the same thing, Stillwell with an arrow pointing back. I looked in the mirror. The man was leaning forward now, his eyes fixed on something ahead. I followed his gaze and saw lights through the trees. Not house lights, something else. Dim and flickering like lanterns or candles, scattered along the side of the road. "What is that?" I asked. "Don't look at them," he said. "Just keep your eyes on the road." But I couldn't help it. As we got closer, I could see shapes standing near the lights. People, I thought, or something shaped like people. They were standing perfectly still, facing the road. And as we passed them, I saw their faces, pale and expressionless, lit from below by the flickering glow. I pressed the gas pedal harder. The car picked up speed, and the shapes fell behind us. My hands were shaking now, and I could feel sweat running down my back despite the cold. "What the hell was that?" I said, my voice louder than I meant it to be. "They're always there," the man said quietly. "You just don't usually see them." "What are they?" "Doesn't matter," he said. "You're past them now." I wanted to stop the car, wanted to turn around and demand answers, but I didn't. Something in his voice, in the way he said it, made me keep driving. The road leveled out, and ahead I saw a glow that looked like streetlights. I sped up, desperate to reach them, and a minute later, the trees opened up, and I was on Route 15, the real Route 15, with the truck stop lit up on the left and the familiar curve of the highway stretching ahead. I pulled over onto the shoulder and sat there, breathing hard. I looked in the mirror. The man was sitting back now, his hands folded again, his face calm. "What just happened?" I asked. "You took a shortcut," he said. "Happens sometimes up here." "That wasn't a shortcut. That wasn't even the same road." "It was the road you needed," he said. He reached for the door handle. "I'll get out here. We're not at the bus station." "I know," he said. He opened the door and stepped out, pulling his duffel bag with him. He leaned down and looked at me through the open door. "You did fine. Don't think about it too much." He shut the door and walked away, heading toward the truck stop. I watched him until he disappeared around the side of the building, and then I sat there for another 10 minutes, trying to make sense of what had happened. I checked my phone. I had signal again. I checked the time. It was almost 2:30. I had been driving for over an hour, but the distance I'd covered shouldn't have taken more than 20 minutes. I drove back to town and finished my shift, but I didn't take any more calls that night. When I got home, I looked at a map, traced the route I should have taken, and tried to figure out where I'd actually been. But the map didn't help. The access road I'd been on should have led straight to Route 15. No detours, no loops, no signs pointing backward. I still drive nights sometimes, but I don't take calls past Stillwell anymore. If dispatch asks, I tell them I'm too far out, or my shift is ending, or my car is acting up. I don't tell them the truth because I don't think they'd believe me. And I don't think I'd believe me either, except I know what I saw. I know what that road felt like, the way it stretched and looped and refused to let me go, until the man in the back seat decided it was time. I still wonder where he really wanted to go, and whether Hazard was ever the destination at all. The next account comes from a driver who learned that some passengers leave more behind than a fare and a tip. I've been running a cab out of a small town near the West Virginia border for 8 years. It's a one-man operation, just me and a Crown Vic I bought off a county auction. The work is steady enough. I cover the town and the surrounding area, mostly driving people to work or to the hospital in the next county over. The mountains here are steep and the roads are old, and a lot of folks don't trust their own vehicles on the ice. So I stay busy in the winter. This happened 2 years ago, late February. It was a Thursday night, and I was parked outside the diner on Main Street, waiting for a call. The temperature had dropped below freezing, and the roads were slick with black ice. I had my heater running and the radio on low, half asleep, when dispatch called and told me I had a pickup at a house on Trace Fork Road. Trace Fork Road is about 6 miles outside of town, a narrow 2-lane that follows the ridge above the river. There are maybe a dozen houses along that stretch, most of them old, some of them empty. I asked dispatch for the address, and she gave me a number I didn't recognize. I wrote it down, plugged it into my GPS, and headed out. The drive took about 15 minutes. The road was worse than I'd expected, icy in the curves and rutted where the plows had scraped it down to the gravel. I passed a couple of driveways marked with reflectors, but no lights on in any of the houses. It was past 11, and most people up here were already asleep. The GPS led me to a driveway on the left, just past a sharp curve. There was a mailbox at the end of the driveway, rusted and tilted to one side, with the numbers painted on it in faded white. I turned in and followed the driveway up a short hill. The house was small, a single-story frame house with peeling paint and a sagging porch. There was a light on inside, visible through a gap in the curtains, and I could see a figure standing near the window. I pulled up, close to the porch, and honked twice, the way I always do. The figure moved away from the window, and a moment later, the front door opened. A woman stepped out onto the porch. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with long dark hair pulled back into a ponytail. She was wearing a heavy coat and carrying a small backpack. She came down the steps and opened the back door, sliding into the seat behind me. "Thank you for coming," she said. Her voice was soft, a little shaky. "No problem," I said. "Where are we headed?" "The hospital in Pineville," she said. "My sister's there. She had a baby tonight, and I need to see her." Pineville was about 30 miles away, mostly highway once you got past the ridge. I nodded and put the car in reverse, backing down the driveway. The woman sat quietly in the back seat, her hands folded over the backpack in her lap. I glanced at her in the mirror. Her face was pale and she looked tired, but not in a way that seemed unusual. Just someone who'd had a long day. I got back onto Trace Fork Road and started the drive toward the highway. The road was still icy, and I kept my speed down, taking the curves slowly. The woman didn't say anything, just stared out the window at the dark trees sliding past. I turned the radio down and focused on the road. About 10 minutes into the drive, I noticed the smell. It was faint at first, just a hint of something sweet and rotten, like fruit left out too long. I thought maybe it was something outside. A dead animal near the road, but the smell got stronger the farther we went. I cracked my window, letting in the cold air, but it didn't help. The smell was inside the car. I glanced in the mirror again. The woman was still staring out the window, her expression blank. I couldn't tell if she noticed the smell or not. "You doing okay back there?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. She didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, she said, "I'm fine." I nodded and kept driving. The smell was getting worse, thick and cloying, and I had to fight the urge to gag. I rolled my window down further, and the cold air rushed in, but the smell didn't go away. It felt like it was clinging to the upholstery, soaking into the seats. Then I heard the sound. It was faint, almost inaudible under the hum of the engine and the rush of the wind through the window. A soft, wet sound like something dripping. I looked in the mirror again, and this time I saw it. There was something dark on the seat beside the woman. It looked like a stain spreading slowly across the fabric. I couldn't tell what it was, but it was growing, pooling around the base of her backpack. The woman didn't seem to notice. She was still staring out the window, her hands folded, her face pale and still. I slowed down, my chest tightening. "Is everything okay?" I asked, louder this time. She turned her head and looked at me in the mirror. Her eyes were dark, glassy, like she was looking through me instead of at me. "I'm fine," she said, again. I pulled over onto the shoulder, my hands shaking. I put the car in park and turned around in my seat. The stain was bigger now, spreading across the seat and onto the floor. It was dark, almost black in the dim light, and the smell was overwhelming. I could see it dripping from the edge of the seat, pooling on the floor mat. "What is that?" I asked, my voice cracking. The woman looked down at the stain, then back at me. Her expression didn't change. "I told you," she said. "I need to see my sister." "Is that blood?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. She didn't respond. She just sat there, staring at me, her hands still folded over her backpack. I reached for the door handle, ready to get out, ready to call someone, but then she spoke again. "Please," she said. "I don't have much time." There was something in her voice, something desperate and hollow, that stopped me. I sat there, frozen, staring at her. The stain was still spreading, and the smell was so strong. Thought I might pass out. But I didn't move. I just sat there, trying to understand what I was seeing. Finally, I turned back around and put the car in drive. I didn't know why. I should have gotten out, should have called the police, should have done anything other than keep driving. But I did. I pulled back onto the road and kept going, heading toward the highway, toward Pineville, toward the hospital. The woman didn't say anything else. She just sat there, silent and still, while the stain spread and the smell filled the car. I kept my window down and drove as fast as I dared on the icy road, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. I thought about asking her more questions, but I didn't. I was too afraid of what she might say. When I finally reached the highway, the stain had covered most of the back seat. I could see it in the mirror, dark and glistening, dripping onto the floor. The woman was still sitting in the same position, her hands folded, her face pale. She looked smaller now, thinner, like she was fading. I reached Pineville 20 minutes later and pulled into the hospital parking lot. I stopped near the emergency room entrance and turned around. The woman was gone. The back seat was empty. The stain was gone too, and so was the smell. The seat was dry, clean, like nothing had been there at all. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty seat, trying to convince myself that I'd imagined it. But I hadn't. I knew what I'd seen, what I'd smelled. I got out of the car and checked the back seat, ran my hand over the fabric. It was dry, cold to the touch. No stains, no dampness, nothing. I went inside the hospital and asked at the front desk if anyone had come in looking for a patient who just had a baby. The woman at the desk checked the records and told me there had been a birth that night, a girl, but the mother had complications and didn't make it. The family had been notified and a sister had been trying to get there but never showed up. I didn't ask any more questions. I just thanked her and walked back to my car. I sat in the driver's seat for a while, staring at the empty back seat, and then I drove home. I still drive nights, but I don't take calls on Trace Fork Road anymore. If dispatch asks, I tell them I'm out of range, or the road is too bad, or I'm already on a fare. I don't tell them the truth, because I don't know how to explain it. I don't know if the woman was real, or if she was something else, something that needed a ride one last time. I don't know if she ever made it to her sister or if she's still trying, but sometimes on cold nights, I catch a whiff of that smell again, faint and distant, and I have to pull over and wait for it to pass. What he brought into his car that night might have been grief, or it might have been something that wears grief like a coat. This next file comes from a driver who picked up a fare that wouldn't let him forget. I've been driving cab in southern West Virginia for 6 years. I work out of a small company that covers 3 counties, mostly rural areas where people don't have a lot of options for getting around. The pay isn't great, but it's steady, and I've gotten to know most of the regulars. I know who tips, who doesn't, who needs help carrying groceries, and who just wants to sit in silence. This was in October 3 years ago. I was on the night shift, covering the stretch between my town and the next one over. It was a slow night, cold and drizzly, and I'd only had 2 fares all evening. I was parked outside a gas station, finishing a coffee and thinking about heading home early, when dispatch called and gave me an address out on Grassy Creek Road. Grassy Creek Road runs along the edge of the National Forest, about 10 miles outside of town. It's not a road I like driving at night. It's narrow winding, and there are long stretches where you don't see any houses or lights, just trees pressing in on both sides. But a fare is a fare, and I needed the money, so I told dispatch I'd take it. The address was about 20 minutes out, deep in the forest. I followed the main road until it turned to gravel, then kept going, watching the GPS on my phone. The rain was light but steady, and the windshield wipers were squeaking with every pass. I didn't see any other cars, didn't see any lights except my own headlights, cutting through the trees. The GPS led me to a turnoff marked by a wooden post with a number carved into it. I turned onto a dirt driveway that wound up through the trees, climbing a gentle slope. After a couple of minutes, I saw a cabin ahead, set back in a clearing. It was small, just 1 story, with a rusted metal roof and a single light on above the front door. I pulled up close to the porch and honked. A man stepped out almost immediately, like he'd been waiting by the door. He was older, maybe in his 60s, with a thick beard and a worn jacket. He was carrying a canvas bag slung over one shoulder. He opened the back door and got in without a word, setting the bag on the seat beside him. I turned around. "Where to?" "Town," he said. "Drop me at the bus station." The bus station was about 25 minutes back the way I'd come. I nodded and started down the driveway. The man didn't say anything else, just sat there with his hands resting on his knees, staring straight ahead. I glanced at him in the mirror a couple of times, but he didn't look back. His face was hard to read, blank and distant, like he was thinking about something far away. I got back onto Grassy Creek Road and started the drive toward town. The rain picked up a little, and I turned the wipers up a notch. The road was slick, and I kept my speed down, taking the curves carefully. The man in the back seat didn't move, didn't shift, didn't even seem to blink. He just sat there, perfectly still. After about 10 minutes, I noticed something in the mirror. There was something on the seat beside him next to the canvas bag. It looked like fabric, dark and bunched up, like a coat or a blanket. I didn't remember seeing it when he got in, but the light had been dim, so I figured I'd just missed it. Then I saw it move. It was a small movement, just a slight shift, like something settling under its own weight. I stared at it in the mirror, my hands tightening on the wheel. The man didn't react, didn't look at it, didn't acknowledge it at all. He just kept staring straight ahead, his face blank. I cleared my throat. "Is that yours?" I asked, nodding toward the seat. He didn't answer right away. Then, slowly, he turned his head and looked at the bundled fabric. He stared at it for a long moment, and then he looked back at me in the mirror. "Yes," he said. "What is it?" "Nothing you need to worry about," he said. I didn't like the way he said it. Flat and final, like the conversation was over. I looked at the bundle again. It was bigger than I'd thought, taking up a good portion of the seat. And it was moving again, not much, just a slow rhythmic shift, like something breathing. "Is there something alive in there?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "No," he said, but I didn't believe him. I could see the fabric moving, rising and falling, and I could hear something now. A faint sound like air moving through a narrow space. It wasn't loud, but it was there, steady and constant, and it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I slowed down and pulled over onto the shoulder. I put the car in park and turned around in my seat. "I need to know what that is," I said. The man looked at me, his eyes dark and unreadable. "It's not your concern," he said. "It's my car," I said. "If there's something back there, I need to know." He stared at me for a long moment, and then he reached over and put his hand on the bundle. The movement stopped immediately. The sound stopped too. Everything went still and silent, and the man's hand rested there, flat and heavy, like he was holding something down. "It's nothing," he said again. "Just drive." I stared at him, at his hand on the bundle, at the blank expression on his face. I wanted to refuse, wanted to tell him to get out, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the way he was looking at me, calm and steady, like he knew I wouldn't push it any further. Or maybe it was the way the bundle had gone completely still the moment he touched it, like it was obeying him. I turned back around and put the car in drive. I didn't say anything else. I just drove, keeping my eyes on the road, trying not to look in the mirror, but I could feel it back there, that bundled shape, and I could feel the man's hand resting on it, holding it down. The rest of the drive was silent. The rain kept falling and the wipers kept squeaking, and the man in the back seat didn't move. When I finally pulled into the bus station parking lot, I stopped near the entrance and turned around. The man was already gathering his canvas bag. He pulled it onto his shoulder and reached for the door handle. The bundle was still there, sitting on the seat beside where he'd been, but now it looked different. Smaller maybe, or flatter, like whatever had been inside had collapsed. "What about that?" I asked, pointing at it. He glanced at it, then looked back at me. "Leave it," he said. "I'm not leaving that in my car." "You won't have to," he said. He opened the door and stepped out, then leaned back in and looked at me one more time. "Don't touch it. It'll be gone by morning." He shut the door and walked away, disappearing into the bus station. I sat there, staring at the bundle. It was still on the seat, dark and shapeless, and I could still see the faint outline of where it had been moving earlier. I thought about getting out and checking it, but something stopped me. The way the man had said it, the certainty in his voice, made me think he was right. I drove home and parked in my driveway. I left the car unlocked, left the bundle in the back seat, and went inside. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept thinking about the way it had moved, the way it had sounded, and the way the man's hand had stilled it so completely. The next morning, I went out to the car and checked the back seat. The bundle was gone. There was nothing there, no fabric, no shape, no sign that anything had ever been on the seat. The seat was clean and dry, and there was no smell, no residue, nothing. I called dispatch and told them I was taking the day off. I didn't explain why, and they didn't ask. I spent the rest of the day trying to make sense of what I'd seen, but I couldn't. I still can't. I still drive nights, but I don't take calls on Grassy Creek Road anymore. If dispatch asks, I tell them I'm too far out, or the weather's too bad, or I've got another fare lined up. I don't tell them the truth because I don't think they'd understand. I don't think I understand it myself. But sometimes, when I'm driving at night and I glance In the mirror, I think I see something on the back seat. Just for a second, a dark shape that shouldn't be there. And when I look again, it's gone. He never asked what the man was carrying, and maybe that was the right choice. This next driver wasn't so lucky, he asked, and he got an answer. I run a small cab service out of eastern Kentucky, just me and one other driver. We split the shifts and cover the area between our town and the next county over. Most of the work is routine, taking people to doctor's appointments, picking up shifts at the plant, giving rides to folks whose cars broke down. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills. This was in December, 2 winters ago. I was working the late shift, covering the area from 9 at night until dawn. It was a cold night, clear and still, and the roads were icy in the low spots. I'd had a couple of fares earlier in the evening, but by midnight it had gone quiet. I was parked outside the 24-hour diner on Highway 52 drinking bad coffee and listening to talk radio when dispatch called with a pickup. The address was out on Blackburn Ridge, about 15 miles outside of town. Blackburn Ridge is one of those places that's more of a direction than a location. There's a cluster of houses and trailers scattered along the ridge, most of them old, some of them abandoned. The people who live up there keep to themselves, and the road up is rough, especially in winter. Dispatch gave me the address and said the fare was a man who needed a ride into town. I wrote it down, finished my coffee, and headed out. The drive took about 20 minutes. I followed Highway 52 until I hit the turnoff for Blackburn Ridge Road, then started climbing. The road was narrow and steep, switchbacking up the side of the ridge. My headlights swept across the trees, bare and skeletal in the cold air, and every now and then I'd catch a glimpse of a house or trailer set back in the woods. No lights on in any of them. The address was near the top of the ridge, marked by a rusted mailbox leaning to one side. I turned on to a gravel driveway that climbed another 100 yards before opening into a small clearing. There was a trailer there, an old single wide with a metal roof and a wooden deck tacked onto the front. A single bulb was burning above the door, casting a weak yellow glow across the clearing. I pulled up close to the deck and honked twice. A man stepped out almost immediately, like he'd been waiting just inside. He was middle-aged, maybe 50, with a thin build and a gaunt face. He was wearing a heavy coat and a ball cap, and he was carrying a large cardboard box in his arms. The box was taped shut, and I could see something written on the side in black marker, but I couldn't make out what it said. He came down the steps carefully, balancing the box, and opened the back door. He set the box on the seat, then climbed in beside it and pulled the door shut. I turned around. "Where are we headed?" "Post office," he said. "In town." The post office closed at 5, but there was a drop box outside that people used after hours. I nodded and started backing down the driveway. The man sat quietly beside the box, one hand resting on top of it like he was steadying it. I glanced at it in the mirror. The box was big, maybe 2 feet by 2 feet, and it looked heavy from the way he'd carried it. I got back onto Blackburn Ridge Road and started the descent toward town. The man didn't say anything, just kept his hand on the box and stared out the window. I turned the radio on low, found a station playing bluegrass, and focused on the road. About 5 minutes into the drive, I heard a sound from the back seat. It was faint, a soft thumping like something shifting inside the box. I glanced in the mirror. The man's hand was still resting on the box, and his face hadn't changed. He didn't seem to notice the sound, or if he did, he didn't react. I kept driving. The sound came again a minute later, louder this time, a definite thump from inside the box. I looked in the mirror again. The man was staring straight ahead, his expression blank. "Everything okay back there?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Then, without looking at me, he said, "It's fine." "What's in the box?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. "Nothing that concerns you," he said. I didn't like the way he said it, flat and cold. I kept my eyes on the road, but I was listening now, paying attention to the back seat. The sound came again, a sharp thump, and then another, rhythmic and insistent, like something was knocking from the inside. "Sounds like something's alive in there," I said. "It's not," the man said. "Then what is it?" He finally looked at me in the mirror, his eyes hard and unblinking. "It's nothing," he said. "Just drive." I wanted to press him, wanted to pull over and open the box, but something in his voice stopped me. There was a certainty there, a warning, and I decided not to push it. I kept driving, kept listening to the thumping, and kept glancing at the box in the mirror. The thumping got louder as we descended the ridge. It wasn't constant, but it came in bursts. 3 or 4 thumps in quick succession, then silence, then more thumps. The man's hand stayed on the box the whole time, pressing down slightly, like he was trying to keep it still, but it didn't help. The thumping continued, and I could see the box shifting slightly with each impact, rocking on the seat. When we reached the bottom of the ridge and turned onto the highway, the thumping stopped. The silence was sudden and complete, and it was almost worse than the noise. I looked in the mirror. The box was still, and the man's hand was still resting on top of it. His face hadn't changed. "What the hell is in there?" I asked, my voice louder than I'd intended. He looked at me again, and this time there was something in his eyes, something that made my stomach clench. "You don't want to know," he said. "Yeah, I do," I said. "You're in my car, and that thing's been making noise the whole way down. I have a right to know." He stared at me for a long moment, and then he leaned forward slightly. "It's something that doesn't belong anywhere," he said quietly. "I'm taking it where it can't hurt anyone." "What does that mean?" "It means you should stop asking questions," he said, "and drive faster." I didn't argue. I pressed the gas pedal and picked up speed, heading toward town. The box stayed silent, but I could feel the weight of it in the back seat, could feel the man's hand pressing down on it, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was inside was waiting. We reached town 15 minutes later. I pulled up outside the post office and stopped near the drop box. The man opened the door and climbed out, then reached back in and lifted the box. It was heavy, I could tell from the way he handled it, and he carried it carefully, holding it away from his body like it might bite. He walked over to the drop box and set the box down on the ground beside it. Then he turned and looked at me through the windshield. He didn't say anything, just looked at me for a long moment, and then he picked up the box and walked away, disappearing around the side of the building. I sat there, engine running, staring at the empty drop box. I thought about following him, thought about seeing where he went, but I didn't. I just sat there, waiting, and after a few minutes, he came back. He was empty-handed. He walked past my car without looking at me, heading down the street toward the center of town. I waited until he was out of sight. Then I got out and walked over to the drop box. I looked around the side of the building where he'd gone, but there was nothing there. No box, no sign of him, nothing. Just an empty alley in the back of the building, dark and quiet. I went back to my car and sat there for a while, trying to make sense of it. I thought about calling someone, thought about reporting it, but I didn't know what I'd say. That a man had put a box that made noise into my car and then it disappeared. It didn't make sense, and I knew no one would believe me. I drove home and tried to forget about it, but I couldn't. The sound of that thumping stayed with me, the way it had stopped so suddenly, and the look in the man's eyes when he told me it was something that didn't belong anywhere. I still drive nights, but I don't take calls on Blackburn Ridge anymore. If dispatch asks, I tell them I'm already on a fare, or the road's too bad, or I need to refuel. I don't tell them the truth because I don't know how to explain what happened. I don't know what was in that box, and I don't want to know. But sometimes, late at night, I hear that thumping sound again in my head, and I wonder if it ever stopped, or if it's still out there somewhere, knocking from the inside of something that should never have been sealed. Not every passenger wants to reach a destination. Some of them are still trying to leave. This next driver picked up someone who had been waiting a long time. I've been driving taxi in the mountains of eastern Tennessee for 9 years. It's a small operation, just 3 drivers covering the valley and the ridges around it. Most of the work is local, taking people to the store or the clinic, or over to the next town for work. The roads are rough, the winters are hard, and the pay is low. But I know the area better than anyone, and that's worth something. This happened in March, about 4 years ago. I was on the night shift, covering the stretch from my town to the county line. It was a quiet night, cold but clear, and I'd only had 1 fare so far. I was parked outside a gas station, waiting for the next call, when dispatch came through with an address on Laurel Gap Road. Laurel Gap Road runs along the side of a ridge about 12 miles out of town. It's not heavily traveled, mostly just locals who live in the handful of houses scattered along the route. The address dispatch gave me was near the far end of the road, close to where it dead ends at the National Forest boundary. I headed out, following the main highway, until I reached the turnoff for Laurel Gap. The road climbed steadily, winding up the side of the ridge through dense forest. There were no streetlights, just my headlights cutting through the darkness, and the only sounds were the hum of the engine and the crunch of gravel under the tires. The address was at the end of a long driveway, marked by a weathered mailbox with the numbers barely visible. I turned in and followed the driveway up a gentle slope. It curved through the trees and opened into a clearing with a small house, single story, with a sagging porch and dark windows. There was no light on, no sign of life, and for a moment I thought I'd gotten the address wrong. Then I saw someone standing at the edge of the porch. It was a woman, I thought, though it was hard to tell in the darkness. She was wearing a long coat and standing perfectly still, facing the driveway. I pulled up close and left the engine running, waiting for her to move. She didn't. She just stood there, motionless, and I started to feel uneasy. I rolled down my window. "You call for a cab?" She didn't answer. She just turned and walked toward the car, moving slowly and deliberately. When she reached the back door, she opened it and slid into the seat without a word. I turned around to look at her, and that's when I saw her face. She was older than I'd thought, maybe 60 or 70, with pale lined skin and dark eyes that seemed too large for her face. Her hair was gray and pulled back tightly, and her coat looked old, heavy wool with frayed edges. She didn't look at me. She just sat there, staring straight ahead, her hands folded in her lap. "Where are we going?" I asked. "Town," she said. Her voice was quiet, barely above a whisper. "Anywhere specific?" "Just town," she said. I nodded and put the car in reverse. I backed down the driveway and got onto Laurel Gap Road, heading back the way I'd come. The woman didn't say anything else, didn't move, didn't even seem to breathe. I glanced at her in the mirror a few times, but she just kept staring straight ahead, her face expressionless. We drove for about 10 minutes in silence. The road descended gradually, winding through the forest, and I kept waiting for her to give me a more specific destination. But she didn't. She just sat there, still and silent, and the longer we drove, the more uneasy I felt. Then I noticed something strange. We should have been getting close to the turnoff for the main highway, but the road didn't look right. The trees were thicker, the curves sharper, and I didn't recognize any of the landmarks I should have been seeing. I checked the odometer. I'd gone almost 15 minutes from the house, but we should have reached the highway in 10. I slowed down and glanced in the mirror. The woman was still staring straight ahead, her expression unchanged. "This doesn't look right," I said. She didn't respond. "I think we took a wrong turn," I said. "No," she said quietly. "This is the way." "The way to where?" "Town," she said. I kept driving, but the road kept winding, kept descending, and I kept waiting to see something familiar. After another 10 minutes, I started to panic. The road should have connected to the highway by now, but instead it just kept going, deeper into the forest, darker and narrower with every mile. I pulled over onto the shoulder and put the car in park. I turned around in my seat. "Where are we?" The woman finally looked at me. Her eyes were dark, empty, and when she spoke, her voice was flat and distant. "We're going to town," she said. "We've been driving for 25 minutes, I said. "We should have been there by now." "We're almost there," she said. "Where's there?" I asked, my voice rising. She didn't answer. She just turned her head and looked out the window, staring into the trees. I followed her gaze, but I didn't see anything, just darkness and the faint outline of branches against the sky. I put the car back in drive and kept going, because I didn't know what else to do. The road continued to wind and descend, and I kept checking the mirrors, kept looking for something I recognized. But there was nothing, just trees and darkness and the narrow strip of road caught in my headlights. Then ahead, I saw lights. Not house lights, something else. Small and flickering like lanterns scattered along the side of the road. I slowed down as we approached, and I saw shapes standing near the lights. People, I thought, but they didn't move. They just stood there, facing the road, perfectly still. "What is that?" I asked. "Keep going," the woman said. I drove past the shapes, and as I did, I saw their faces in the glow of the lanterns. They were pale and expressionless, and their eyes followed the car as we passed. My hands were shaking now, and I pressed the gas pedal harder, desperate to get away from them. The lights fell behind us, and the road opened up suddenly. Ahead, I saw the glow of streetlights, and a moment later, I was on the main highway. The real highway, with the gas station and the diner and the familiar curve of the road stretching ahead. I pulled over onto the shoulder and sat there breathing hard. I looked in the mirror. The woman was gone. The back seat was empty. I got out and checked the car, opened the back door, and looked inside. There was nothing. No sign she'd ever been there. The seat was cold and dry, and there was no impression, no scent, nothing. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty seat, trying to convince myself it had been real. But the more I thought about it, the less sure I was. I didn't remember hearing the door open, didn't remember her getting out. She was just gone. I got back in the car and drove home. I didn't tell dispatch what had happened, didn't tell anyone. I didn't know how to explain it, and I didn't think they'd believe me. But I stopped taking calls on Laurel Gap Road after that. If dispatch asks, I tell them I'm too far out, or the weather's too bad, or I've got another fare lined up. I don't tell them the truth because I'm not sure what the truth is. I don't know if the woman was real or if she was something else, something that needed a ride one last time. But I know what I saw on that road. Those shapes standing in the lantern light, and I know what it felt like to drive through something that wasn't supposed to exist. And I know that I never want to go back. Some roads don't follow the rules we think we know. This driver learned that distance isn't always fixed, and some places can only be reached when they want you there. I've been running taxi service out of a small town in Southwest Virginia for 7 years. It's just me and an old Ford sedan covering the area between my town and the surrounding hollers. The work is basic, but it keeps me fed. People need rides to work, to the hospital, to visit family, and in a place where public transit doesn't exist, I'm one of the few options. This was in November 2 years ago. I was working the late shift, covering calls from 8 in the evening until dawn. It had been a slow night, and by midnight, I'd only done 2 fares. I was parked outside a convenience store, eating a sandwich and listening to the radio, when dispatch called with a pickup. The address was on a road I'd never heard of. Shale Hollow Road, somewhere off Route 23. I asked dispatch to repeat it, and she gave me the same information. I plugged it into my GPS, but it didn't recognize the address. I tried a couple of variations, but nothing came up. I called dispatch back. I can't find this road. You sure the address is right? That's what the caller gave us, she said. He said it's about 10 miles past the junction with 23. Look for a gravel turnoff on the right. I didn't like the sound of it, but I told her I'd find it. I finished my sandwich, tossed the wrapper, and headed out. Route 23 is a 2-lane highway that cuts through the hills, winding through forest and farmland. There are a few scattered houses along the way, but mostly it's empty. I drove for about 15 minutes, watching for a turnoff, but I didn't see anything. Just trees and darkness, and the occasional mailbox marking a driveway. I slowed down and kept my eyes on the right side of the road. After another 5 minutes, I saw it. A narrow gravel road, barely wide enough for one car, forking off into the trees. There was no sign, no marker, just the pale strip of gravel disappearing into the darkness. I turned onto it and started driving. The road climbed gradually, winding up the side of a hill. The trees pressed in close on both sides, and my headlights barely reached past the first curve. I checked the odometer. I'd gone almost 2 miles from the highway, and I still hadn't seen any houses. Then ahead, I saw a shape on the side of the road. It was a man standing near the edge of the gravel, one hand raised. I slowed down and pulled up beside him. He was young, maybe in his late 20s, with a thin build and a dark jacket. He opened the back door and got in without saying anything. I turned around. "You the one who called?" He nodded. "Where are we going?" "Back to town," he said. "Main Street." I nodded and started to turn the car around, but the road was too narrow. I had to drive forward until I found a wider spot. Then I backed up and maneuvered until I was facing the way I'd come. The man in the back seat didn't say anything, just sat there with his hands in his lap, staring out the window. I started driving back down the hill. The road felt longer than it should have, winding and twisting through the trees. I kept waiting to see the junction with Route 23, but it didn't come. I checked the odometer again. I'd gone almost 5 miles, which didn't make sense. The drive up had only been 2 miles. I glanced in the mirror. The man was still staring out the window, his face blank. "This road feel longer to you?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, he said, "It always does." "What do you mean?" "The road," he said. "It changes." I didn't like the way he said it. Flat and matter-of-fact, like it was normal. "Changes how?" "Length," he said. "Sometimes it's short, sometimes it's not." I stared at him in the mirror, trying to decide if he was messing with me. His expression didn't change. He just kept looking out the window. calm and distant. I kept driving. The road continued to wind, and I kept checking the odometer. 6 miles, 7, 8. I should have reached the highway by now, should have seen the lights from Route 23, but there was nothing. Just trees and darkness, and the narrow gravel road stretching ahead. I pulled over and stopped the car. I turned around in my seat. "What's going on?" The man finally looked at me. His eyes were dark, hard, to read in the dim light. "You have to wait," he said. "Wait for what?" "For it to let us out," he said. "Let us out?" I said, my voice rising. "What are you talking about?" "The road," he said. "It decides when you leave." I stared at him, my chest tightening. "That doesn't make any sense." "It doesn't have to," he said. "Just wait, it won't be long." I didn't know what to say. I turned back around and sat there, staring at the road ahead. The trees were motionless, the air still, and the only sound was the idle of the engine. I thought about getting out, thought about walking, but something stopped me. The way the man had said it, the certainty in his voice, made me think he was right. We sat there for what felt like hours, though it was probably only 10 or 15 minutes. Then ahead, I saw a faint glow. It was distant at first, barely visible through the trees, but it grew brighter as I watched. I put the car in drive and started moving toward it. The glow became streetlights, and a moment later, the trees opened up, and I was on Route 23, the real Route 23, with the junction and the gas station and the familiar stretch of highway ahead. I pulled over onto the shoulder and sat there shaking. I looked in the mirror. The man was still in the back seat, calm and still, his hands folded in his lap. "What the hell was that?" I asked. "The road," he said, "like I told you." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I have," he said. He reached for the door handle and opened it. "Thanks for the ride." He got out and walked away, heading toward the gas station. I watched him until he disappeared inside, and then I sat there for another 10 minutes, trying to make sense of what had happened. I drove back to town and finished my shift, but I didn't take any more calls that night. When I got home, I looked at a map, tried to find Shale Hollow Road, but it wasn't there. No record of it, no marker, nothing. I asked around the next day, asked some of the old-timers if they'd heard of it, but no one had. I still drive nights, but I don't take calls past Route 23 anymore. If dispatch asks, I tell them I'm already on a fare, or I'm too far out, or the weather's too bad. I don't tell them the truth because I don't know how to explain it. I don't know what the road was, or where it really goes, or why it decided to let us out when it did. But I know I'm not going back. And if someone calls for a pickup on Shale Hollow Road again, I'm going to tell dispatch to send someone else. That driver turned around and came back. This next one wasn't given a choice. The road took him where it wanted him to go, and the passenger was just along for the ride. I've been driving cab in the Kentucky mountains for 10 years. I work out of a small company that covers 3 counties, mostly back roads in small towns where people don't have many options. It's hard work, long hours, and the pay is barely enough. But I know these mountains better than most, and that's kept me in business. This happened in January, just over a year ago. I was on the night shift, covering the area between my town and the county line. It was a bitter, cold night, with a sharp wind coming down off the ridges and ice forming in the low spots on the road. I'd had a few fares earlier in the evening, but by 1 a.m, it had gone quiet. I was parked outside a diner, drinking coffee and trying to stay warm, when dispatch called with a pickup. The address was on Kettle Creek Road, about 20 miles out of town. Kettle Creek Road is one of those old logging roads that was paved decades ago and hasn't been maintained since. It runs along the bottom of a narrow valley, following the creek through dense forest. There are a few houses along the route, but most of them are abandoned now, and the people who still live there keep to themselves. Dispatch gave me the address and said the fare was a woman who needed a ride to the hospital in the next county. That was a 40-minute drive, maybe longer with the ice, but the fare was paying extra for the distance, so I took it. I headed out, following the main highway, until I reached the turnoff for Kettle Creek Road. The road descended sharply, dropping into the valley, and I could see the dark line of the creek running alongside it. The trees were thick on both sides, bare branches reaching overhead like a canopy. There were no streetlights, just my headlights cutting through the darkness. The address was about 10 miles in, marked by a mailbox leaning to one side. I turned onto a narrow driveway that climbed a short hill. At the top was a small house, single-story, with a sagging roof and boarded-up windows. There was a light on above the front door, and I could see a figure standing on the porch. I pulled up close and honked. The figure stepped down into the light, and I saw it was a woman, middle-aged with a pale face and dark hair pulled back into a bun. She was wearing a heavy coat and carrying a small bag. She opened the back door and got in without a word, setting the bag on the seat beside her. I turned around. "Hospital in the next county?" She nodded, her expression blank. I started back down the driveway and got onto Kettle Creek Road, heading deeper into the valley. The woman didn't say anything, just sat there with her hands folded in her lap, staring out the window. I glanced at her in the mirror a couple of times, but she didn't look back. We drove for about 15 minutes, following the creek through the valley. The road was narrow and icy, and I kept my speed down, taking the curves carefully. The woman didn't move, didn't shift, didn't make a sound. She just sat there, still and silent. And the longer we drove, the more uneasy I felt. Then I noticed the road wasn't going the way it should. I should have been climbing out of the valley by now, heading up toward the ridge that would take me to the next county. But the road was still following the creek, still winding through the forest, and I didn't recognize any of the landmarks. I slowed down and checked the odometer. I'd gone almost 20 miles from the house, but the drive to the next county should have been no more than 10 or 12 miles from that point. Something wasn't right. I glanced in the mirror. The woman was still staring out the window, her face blank. "This doesn't look right," I said. She didn't respond. "I think we're on the wrong road," I said. "No," she said quietly. "This is the right road. But we should have reached the turnoff by now." "We're not taking the turnoff," she said. I stared at her in the mirror. "What do you mean?" "We're going a different way," she said. "There is no different way," I said. "This road only goes one direction." She didn't answer. She just kept staring out the window, and I realized her lips were moving slightly, like she was whispering something I couldn't hear. I kept driving because I didn't know what else to do. The road continued to follow the creek, winding deeper into the valley, and I kept waiting to see something familiar. But there was nothing. Just trees and darkness, and the narrow strip of road caught in my headlights. After another 10 minutes, the road started to climb. That was wrong too. There was no climb on this route, just a long descent into the valley, and then a gradual rise on the other side. But now the road was rising sharply, switchbacking up the side of a ridge I didn't recognize. I pulled over onto the shoulder and put the car in park. I turned around in my seat. "Where are we?" The woman finally looked at me. Her eyes were dark, empty, and when she spoke, her voice was flat and distant. "We're almost there." Almost where? Where we're supposed to be, she said. I don't understand, I said, my voice shaking. You will, she said. I turned back around and stared at the road ahead. The trees had thinned out, and I could see the sky above, clear and cold and filled with stars. The road continued to climb, and I could see a faint glow ahead, like lights on the ridgeline. I put the car back in drive and kept going. The road leveled out, and I saw a cluster of buildings ahead, small and dark, scattered along the ridge. There were lights in some of the windows, dim and flickering, and I could see shapes moving inside. It looked like a town, but it wasn't a town I'd ever seen. I slowed down and stopped in the middle of the road. The woman opened the door and got out, pulling her bag with her. She walked around to my window and leaned down, looking at me through the glass. You can go now, she said. Go where? I asked. Where the hell are we? Nowhere you need to stay, she said. She straightened up and walked away, heading toward one of the buildings. I watched her until she disappeared inside, and then I sat there, staring at the empty street. I didn't know what to do. I thought about getting out, thought about looking for someone to ask, but the place felt wrong, empty in a way that had nothing to do with the number of buildings or the lights in the windows. It felt like a place that shouldn't exist. I put the car in reverse and started backing down the road. I didn't turn around, just kept backing up, watching the town recede in my mirrors. When I reached the bottom of the ridge, the road leveled out and I saw the creek again, the real creek and the familiar stretch of forest. I turned the car around and drove back the way I'd come. The road felt shorter this time, more direct, and within 20 minutes, I was back on the main highway. I pulled over and sat there, shaking, trying to make sense of what had happened. I called dispatch and told them the fare had been completed, but I didn't explain what had happened. I didn't think they'd believe me. I barely believed it myself. I still drive nights, but I don't take calls on Kettle Creek Road anymore. If dispatch asks, I tell them the road's too bad, or I'm too far out, or I've got another fare lined up. I don't tell them the truth, because I don't know what the truth is. But I know what I saw on that ridge, that town that shouldn't have been there, and I know what it felt like to drive through a place that existed somewhere outside the normal world. And I know that I'm never going back, no matter how much they pay. Every driver in these mountains learns the same lesson eventually. Some fares aren't what they seem, and some roads go places that aren't on any map. This last account comes from a man who thought he understood the rules until one night proved him wrong. I've been driving taxi in these mountains for 13 years. I work out of a town in eastern Kentucky that's barely a town, just a post office and a gas station and a handful of houses scattered along the valley. Most of my work is driving people to jobs in the next county or taking them to the clinic when their cars break down. It's not much, but it's steady, and I know the roads better than anyone. This was in April 2 years ago. I was on the night shift, covering the area between my town and the ridges to the south. It was a warm night, unseasonably warm, and the roads were clear for the first time in months. I'd had a few fares earlier in the evening, but by midnight it had gone quiet. I was parked outside the gas station, half asleep, when dispatch called with a pickup. The address was on Pine Mountain Road, about 15 miles out of town. Pine Mountain Road is one of the oldest roads in the area, a narrow two-lane that climbs up the side of the mountain and then descends into the next valley. There are a few houses along the route, but most of them are old and empty. The people who still live there are old too, and they don't go out much. Dispatch gave me the address and said the fare was an older man who needed a ride into town. I wrote it down and headed out. The drive took about 20 minutes. I followed the main highway until I reached the turnoff for Pine Mountain Road, then started climbing. The road was steep and winding, switchbacking up the side of the mountain. The trees were thick on both sides, and the air was warm and still. I passed a few driveways marked with reflectors, but no lights in any of the windows. The address was near the top of the mountain, marked by a rusted mailbox with the numbers painted on it in faded white. I turned onto a gravel driveway that climbed another 100 yards before opening into a clearing. There was a cabin there, small and old, with a stone chimney and a metal roof. A single light was on above the front door, and I could see a figure standing on the porch. I pulled up close and honked. The figure stepped down into the light, and I saw it was an old man, maybe 70 or 80, with a thin frame and a weathered face. He was wearing a flannel shirt and jeans, and he was carrying a walking stick. He opened the back door and got in slowly, setting the stick on the seat beside him. I turned around. "Where to?" "Town," he said. His voice was rough, like he didn't use it much. "Anywhere specific?" "Just town," he said. "I'll tell you when to stop." I nodded and started back down the driveway. The old man sat quietly in the back seat, his hands resting on his knees. I glanced at him in the mirror. His face was calm, but there was something in his eyes, something distant and watchful. I got back onto Pine Mountain Road and started the descent. The road wound down the side of the mountain, curving through the forest, and I kept my speed steady, taking the turns carefully. The old man didn't say anything, just sat there, staring out the window. After about 10 minutes, I noticed something strange. The road didn't look the way it should. I should have been descending all the way to the valley, but instead the road was leveling out, running along the side of the mountain. I checked the odometer. I'd gone almost 15 minutes from the cabin, but I should have reached the valley in 10. I glanced in the mirror. The old man was still staring out the window, his expression unchanged. "This doesn't look right," I said. He didn't answer right away. Then quietly, he said, "It's the mountain." "What do you mean?" "The mountain decides," he said. "How long it takes, where you go." I stared at him in the mirror. "That doesn't make sense." "Doesn't have to," he said. "That's just how it is." I didn't know what to say. I kept driving, kept watching the road, and kept waiting for it to start descending again. But it didn't. It just kept running level, winding through the trees, and I started to feel like I was driving in circles. Then ahead, I saw lights. Not house lights, something else. Small and flickering, scattered along the side of the road. I slowed down as we approached, and I saw shapes standing near the lights. People, I thought, but they didn't move. They just stood there, facing the road, perfectly still. "What is that?" I asked. "Don't look at them," the old man said. "Just keep driving." But I couldn't help it. As we passed, I saw their faces in the glow of the flickering lights. They were pale and expressionless, and their eyes followed the car as we went by. My hands tightened on the wheel, and I pressed the gas pedal harder. The lights fell behind us, and the road started to descend again. I breathed out, relieved, and checked the mirror. The old man was leaning forward now, his eyes fixed on something ahead. "Almost there," he said quietly. "Almost where?" I asked. "You'll see," he said. The road descended sharply, and ahead I saw the glow of streetlights. A moment later, the trees opened up, and I was in town, the real town, with the gas station and the post office and the familiar curve of the main street. I pulled over and stopped near the post office. I turned around in my seat. "This is town." The old man nodded. He reached for the door handle, then stopped and looked at me. "You did fine," he said. "Most people don't." Don't. What? I asked. Make it down, he said. He opened the door and stepped out, pulling his walking stick with him. He leaned down and looked at me through the open door. The mountain doesn't always let people go. You were lucky. He shut the door and walked away, heading down the street toward the center of town. I watched him until he disappeared around a corner, and then I sat there, staring at the empty street. I called dispatch and told them the fare was complete, but I didn't explain what had happened. I didn't think they'd understand. I barely understood it myself. I drove home and tried to sleep, but I couldn't. I kept thinking about the road, the way it had refused to descend, and the shapes standing in the flickering light. I kept thinking about what the old man had said, that the mountain decides and that most people don't make it down. The next day, I asked around town, asked if anyone knew the old man or the cabin on Pine Mountain Road. No one did. I drove back up there a week later during the day, and I found the driveway in the mailbox. But when I followed the driveway up to the clearing, there was nothing there. No cabin, no stone chimney, no sign that anything had ever been there. Just an empty clearing and the trees pressing in on all sides. I still drive nights, but I don't take calls on Pine Mountain Road anymore. If dispatch asks, I tell them I'm too far out, or the weather's too bad, or I'm already on a fare. I don't tell them the truth, because I don't know what the truth is. But I know what I saw on that mountain, and I know what it felt like to drive a road that didn't follow the rules. And I know that some places in these mountains don't belong to us. No matter how well we think we know them, they belong to something older, something that was here long before the roads were cut and the towns were built. And when that something decides it's your turn to see it, all you can do is keep driving and hope it lets you go.